What are your words of wisdom for graduate students aspiring to be people like you?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that question, so I made some notes on it. And they are notes that are based upon things I think I have learned, and certainly in recent years have been trying to teach my students. There are 5, 6 of them. The first one, the notion that learned people seek to produce knowledge in the pursuit of understanding. And basically what I'm suggesting there is that actually extension of a point I was making in response to your question concerning what I learned from Du Bois.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know, but it's even more important to understand. The facts contribute to knowing, but the meaning of those facts, the meaning of the experience, contributes to understanding. But you don't really understand if you only know from a single perspective or in a single context or from a single experience. You understand when you have an appreciation for the phenomenon in question from the perspective of many other people or many different perspectives, and know how the thing operates in a number of contexts.
Mm.
And then you have the hard task, that is of deciding, okay, what it means and what is my position with respect to it. Now, when I end up at my position, I'm being rather subjective. I have a responsibility for letting my students, my readers, my audience know that that is my subjective opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But it is based upon all the stuff I know from all of these different perspectives and different contexts. So to know is important, but to understand is more important. Now the second one, I have been thinking in recent years that the principles that can be derived from health maintenance and the public health movement are an appropriate model for education. The folk in medicine learned maybe 100 years ago that while hospitals were necessary and useful, they didn't contribute much to the health of the nation. If you're talking about the health of the people in the United States, the fact that we have good hospitals contributes modestly to it. But the fact that we've got good garbage disposal systems, good sewage systems, that we are beginning to control air pollution, and even more important, that people are beginning to take exercise and diet, the avoidance of fatty foods. These changes in people's conditions of life, changes in the infrastructure of the society, which contribute to health maintenance, account for far more of the health statistics in the country than do the excellent hospitals we have.
Mm.
Now, when you get sick, the hospital is important. But when you are talking about health maintenance, it is the infrastructure that supports good health and the human attitudes and behaviors that support good health that carry the weight. I'm convinced that the same is true in education. We need good schools, but even more than that, we need the infrastructure in the society that supports the conditions necessary for intellective development. and we need the attitudes and the behaviors toward learning that support that end. And the third one, education is not coterminous with schooling. We talked about that earlier, so I don't need to extend it. And it certainly grows out of my public health approach, or the use of a public health model for education. Schooling is important. We want the very best schools we can get, and we want to have open and equitable access to them.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, we need all these other things that happen in people's lives that enable schools to do their work. When Bourdieu talks about his forms of education relevant capital, health, informed human beings, material resources, nutrition, social networks, and the one that isn't often discussed is one that's called polity. Polity refers to a sense of membership, of belonging. I think one of the neglected aspects of our approach to education is our failure to give sufficient attention to the sense of inclusion and membership, the relationship of the sense of inclusion and membership felt by the learner that influences the way in which the learner engages the learning task, and felt by the society or the teachers or by the people who are providing it. Because if I sense that you and I are members of the same family, the same society, I care deeply about your education. If you are out of my domain, I could care less about what's happening in your education. Fourth one, we've already talked about. Educational assessment should inform pedagogy and enhance learning. I don't object to its being used for accountability. I don't object for its being used to assist in management and planning and placement. But its primary function ought to be to help us teachers know better what we should do to teach, and help learners know better what it is they should be doing in order to learn. When the AERA gave me my award for, what was it, transforming research knowledge into practice, or something of that sort, I talked about the bi-directionality of knowledge production. And by that, I'm simply arguing that knowledge production, we have traditionally recognized that practice is informed by theory. Research, we try to convert it into practice. But we've given less attention to the ways in which practice can inform theory. And I'm convinced that it is a two-way street. From the scholarly analysis of practice, we can move to theory. And if one looks at the history of science, we see that in history, it is the workers, it is the people who are involved every day in doing the stuff who have contributed mightily to technology and new scientific notions. Now, it's true that the notions that they come up with in the tradition of the scientific method are subjected to confirmation or disconfirmation. But those notions that we test as hypotheses, many of them grow out of the experiences of people who are doing things, if for no other reason than to make the job easier, to make it quicker, to be more efficient. So I would want my students to understand and appreciate that while using theory to inform practice is important, but using practice to inform the generation of theory is equally important. And the last one is not unrelated to it. And that's the idea that hermeneutics,
Mm-hmm.
interpretive processes, interpretive strategies, interpretation
Mm-hmm.
is an important way of producing knowledge. In fact, I think it is probably the fundamental way, because even those of us who are heavily steeped in empiricism, what we are finally doing is trying to make sense out of, trying to interpret the data that are produced by it. Or if we go to my bi-directionality,
Mm-hmm.
we are trying to make sense out of the data that come from practice to inform theory. I think that we in education need to give considerably more attention to preparing our students to take more seriously both the advantages provided by the opportunities and the responsibility for interpretation. That means you use your intuition, you use your imagination to try to think about what this means. C. Wright Mills would say, and not only what it means, but what it could mean. C. Wright Mills liked to ask the what if question. What if this thing were different? What would it mean? What would it be?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Carl Kasel states that he believes your greatest accomplishment is that you can push an agenda of civil rights and equal opportunity that is at once activist and urgent, and on the other hand, thoughtful and collegial. You combine passion with grace, broad vision with clarity, of old questions posed in new, fruitful ways. According to Anna Marie, you are one of the world's most thoroughly decent people she knows, and you are everything she thinks of when she defines a good man. Every one of your friends and family had the same thing to say about you. You should be congratulated for that. But Ernest Washington might have said it best. When he thinks of you, he thinks of a comment Miles Davis made about Duke Ellington. He said that at least once a year, every jazz musician should get down on his knees and thank God for Duke Ellington. Your contributions to education and psychology have been many, and most go unreported. I think that each of us in education should at least once a year get down on our knees and thank God for Edmund Gordon. So we are down on our knees and thanking you so much for being you, Edmund, and thanking you for everything you have done for us, for future educationists, educational researchers, graduate students, and most importantly for students, especially those who have needed and benefited from your wisdom, insight, and contributions the most. So thank you so much for interviewing me today. It's been truly a pleasure.